Hi, good afternoon. Uh, I'd like to talk about a subject that's greatly understood. I talk about dualism, non-dualism, uh, and I talk about Maya, and I talk about illusion, and I talk about ego, and all these things are interlinked. And today I want to talk a little bit about uh, what I've come to understand is some of the background and some of the reasons that we are led to believe that our mind will lead us to believe that we live in a dualistic state of separateness and division. Because like I said, this is probably one of the most misunderstood or hardest to grasp concepts of the whole awakening process. Okay. Before we come into this world, our soul chooses the right parents, the right place, the right time, the right circumstances to be reincarnated, to be born into. And in this state, we know all the past. We know what's happened. We know what we need to learn. So we choose. We're active participants in this choice. We're not victims. No matter what your circumstances that you find yourself after birth, you need to remember that you chose it for a purpose. And if your conditions aren't so good, maybe your lessons were harder to learn, but they want to optimize. Your soul wants to give you the best opportunity that it can to work out past karma to the point that you can begin the process, begin learning how to eliminate your karma. And in that process of elimination, you begin to understand that there is no difference between bad karma and good karma. It's part of that illusion. Some karma, if we're born into a rich, we're handsome, we're tall, we're young, the world is our oyster, we feel like we must have done good deeds, good karma. And it could be quite the contrary. It could be that you're given these primal conditions so that you can learn the true importance, what's truly important, and none of this is important. So if you have nothing to lose in your mind, in your life, in your ego, then you have to discover that the hollowness of these so-called privileged life, rich, tall, handsome, smart. It's all obstacles. It's a different kind of battle than when you're born into really, maybe you're handicapped or physically challenged, or that you're born into a really poor environment in a poor country, in where it seems that the odds are so hard to overcome. But look at it this way. When you have nothing, you've got nothing to lose. When you've got everything, then your mind believes that it has everything. Money, riches, fame, looks, health. Then you feel like you've got everything to lose, and you hold on to it, you clench tight, and you don't want to give it up. And so maybe in a way, it's harder to overcome having everything. Apparently having everything to lose, compared to a condition where you have nothing to lose. So that's another way of looking at your circumstances. But remember, the bottom line is here. You yourself, along with his assistance of your spirit guides, of your higher self, choose the environment that you're going to find yourself taking your first breath, opening your eyes for the first time. And then this is a situation that you have to deal with. Remember, previously to come into this existence, You knew everything. What will be, what could be, what has been, what is. All-knowing. And the all-knowingness it boils down to one thing. Is that the unification, that we're all one. And as soon as you're born into a body, the process of accumulating a sense of separateness and individual identity and ego begins. And it's begun by the people around you, which you chose. Remember, no matter how bad your mom and dad are, you chose them for a purpose. So I think that this is part of taking personal responsibility. I had bad parents. I had born in a poor environment, blah, 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 blah. And we all know these stories. The victim. It's really easy to play the victim. What's not so easy is to recognize your responsibility. There's no one to blame. And it doesn't make much sense to blame yourself, because remember, you chose this. With assistance from your spirit guides, you chose this condition, environment, parents, country, to best enhance or best allow you to begin the process of dealing with the best karma, both good and bad, and to the end of eliminating karma. And remember what I said about karma practice. Even when you're awakened, you've remembered that there's no separation and no division. That it's unified, it's whole, that we're all one. The universe is perfect. Infinitely perfect. Even in spite of that, we find ourselves in these conditions. So, and this is an important word, condition and conditioning. You are conditioned from the time you take your first breath by those around you to start this process of disassociation from wholeness and embracing through the growth of the ego, separateness and division. And part of this process is duality. It begins primal level, me, them. Our eyes tell us that we're looking outward at a world. And our eyes, basically, don't believe your eyes. Our eyes can't tell us what's real and what's not. That's a later stage, and your heart will be much more important in this determination of what's real and what's not than your eyes or any of your other senses. Smelling, taste, touch, hearing can possibly be. So along this very beginning of this creation of duality is the fact that we're in a body and we look out and we can see others. So this is me and that's them. And in the beginning, as a baby, it's the input from around us that begins this process of developing this sense of separateness, which is personified, which is sustained and nurtured in the development and growth of an ego. In order for an ego to exist, there has to be this false illusion of duality. Tall, short, us, them, fat, thin. All these things that our mind tricks us, because remember, our mind is a trickster. Our little mind, the monkey mind, is a trickster. It's tricking us into this acceptance of an illusion. And I want to give a little background to why I think this might be so. And again, this is my input. But if we can you imagine the burden of coming into the as you gain consciousness, as you regain consciousness, because it's never going anywhere. Consciousness is consciousness. So as you gain your awareness of consciousness, at least your limited view of consciousness, you see, or you think you see, this individualized, differentiated individual, which you come to recognize as yourself. But imagine the burden of coming into life and knowing about every past life, all your karma, all the people that you're going to meet in this lifetime that you're going to have to deal with karma. It's like, can you imagine knowing everything before you even get started? Where would you begin? It'd be overwhelming. So we're blessed. Think of it as a blessing. As we're born, as our consciousness comes in to be expressed in an individual, seemingly individual being, we forget what we've always known. And our chore in this lifetime, or this series of lifetimes, however long it takes, and when it happens, and when it happens is when it's supposed to happen, and not through any effort, not through any secret teachings or any kind of anything other than the fact that when the time is right, it happens. So we're born as a tabula rasa, a blank slate. And the earlier you can start practicing meditation, the better. I was already sitting before I knew what sitting was, but by 12 or 13, I was actively meditating because I had read, my mom had this beautiful metaphysical Western theosophy, Annie Besant, Madame Blavatsky, what's the guy's Casey? Can't remember his first name now. Casey, who taught about, it was a Western Christmas. Humphreys, I think of a lot of examples. My mom was very much steeped in the Western metaphysical world. And she had a library, and I would read this stuff because I was a voracious reader and would get bored with what was around. I just raided her library and read all these things. One of the first things I can remember is Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahamsa Yogananda, who became my mentor, who became my guide, so to speak, even though he wasn't in the human body. At the time I discovered him. But be that as it may, I was exposed to meditation, and meditation will give you glimpses. And the more disciplined you are in the beginning about sitting regularly, sitting for a regular amount of time, sitting at a specific time of day, you have to regulate. This takes some discipline, and you'll be exposed in bits and pieces and flashes, and pretty soon it becomes more and more coherent as you become more and more familiar and more longing for the condition of wholeness, of oneness. You miss that. You miss that, and you have this sense. And when I mentioned to my future teacher, one of the questions that before I was deemed worthy of being in their organization was, what is Zen? And the words just came out, the quickest way home. The quickest way home. And the woman that I was speaking with, which was at that time in the hierarchy, she was just below the master. She ran out of the room, and the next thing I know, I'm sitting in his presence. So this must resonate, the quickest way home. And that's the sense of emptiness that you might feel is that something's missing. Well, something's missing in our life. And it's a sense of, for me, I never felt at home. I never identified. I spent many years in Hawaii, and I tried to create that as a home until Hawaii pushed me away, and I came to Taiwan, and Taiwan's provided me with the opportunities that I needed in this particular journey to get to where I am as I sit and look at you. So as much as I wanted to stay in Hawaii, as little as I wanted to leave, I was forced out. And boy, I was reluctant. Talk about kicking and fighting. I was literally homeless or living in my car because Hawaii wasn't providing for me. It was the universe was communicating to me that this was not the right place, even though I longed for it to be, and I watched those around me succeed, and the universe seemed to provide for them. And I was down to pennies, and enough money to put gas in the car, and move from location to location. And in those days, it wasn't kosher. They didn't accept sleeping in cars, so the police were on the outlook, and if they saw anybody sleeping in the car, they wake them up and move them on. And now this is the early days of homelessness, and now it's become a pandemic, so to speak, that they can't even be bothered. If you're sleeping in your car, at least you're not blocking the public sidewalk. So, different world. Same smell, different world, seemingly. So you have to start learning. I think the most important thing on this journey that will take you to dealing with the ego, to the reconciliation of seemingly diametrically opposed constructs as being the same: love, hate, tall, short. This is like to go from the duality, the false duality that is given you to birth as a challenge. Basically, you're challenged. You can't know everything. You have to get back to where you begin, and it might take lifetime or many lifetimes. Well, it'll take many lifetimes. But I was born knowing that something was missing. I was born knowing that what I saw, that the ego wasn't me. Born to question, until the time came when questions no longer served me, and I became questionless. I didn't have any questions. From the man of a million questions to, I should say, boy of a million questions. Why are we here? Was the biggest question. What am I missing? Where's home? Because no matter how many places, let me do a short. Born in California till the age of about 12. Moved to America and Samoa, of all places in the South Pacific, for a couple years. Ended up on the way back to the U.S., to the continental U.S., stopping in Hawaii and having a mother with enough foresight to say, hey, there's nothing for us there, let's stay here. So I came upon Hawaii. And as the conditions got worse for me, as it became harder and harder, in the process, I went to Japan and started trying to establish myself as a teacher of a second language, a native speaker teaching English in Japan, and it just never worked out. I tried 3 or 4 or 5 times. And the events that led up to me, all the coincidences that led up to with me to going to Japan, giving up, and visiting Taiwan for just 4 days. And now here I sit 24 years later. And this all came to me in a dream. And since the day I stepped on this beautiful island, it has sustained me, it has provided for me in a way that Hawaii just didn't do anymore. It's not that it couldn't, it's because it wouldn't, because I needed to be in a different place and time. And in my dream it said, go to Taiwan, there's something for you. Little did I know. And I believe that I'm only partially experienced what's in store for me in my journey in Taiwan. That makes me smile, because there's more to go. So here we are. Nothing is easy until it's really easy. Everything is difficult, complex, until you are prepared to see the simplicity. I laugh at myself all the time, because I thought, this is overwhelming, it's so complex, there's so much to know, there's so much, and then I saw the simplicity of just letting go of the illusion. This is what I call remembering the forgotten. The forgotten is our perfect condition. That is all that's true, our oneness. And once we remember this, the ego, the trickster, all the other toys, the possessions, the need for recognition, the need to be special, disappears. I can look at you and smile and say, how ordinary I am. Even though it took extraordinary work, luck, circumstances to get me to this point of accepting my ordinariness. How can you be special? How can you seek any recognition for just learning the obvious? There is no separation and there is no division, and everything that the eye sees and the mind and the senses in the world that we create, we say that's reality. And they said, people said to me all the time, you got to be realistic. And I thought to myself, you mean I have to accept your illusion of what reality is? Because each of us, by definition, have our own, we created our own world. The world I see and smell and taste is certainly not your world that you smell and see. And you can be equally convinced, as I was at a certain stage, that what I saw and what I experienced and what my senses told me and what my little monkey mind told me and what my ego supported was all a big Buddha belly laugh, illusion, Maya. And it took a lot of hard work to get to the point. You have to work really, really hard until you give up. And this is a kind of constructive giving up. When you surrender and say, okay, the noble is unknowable to me at the condition, at this time, and this state that I'm in. I'm so caught up in the illusion of the ego. I'm so trapped by the trickster of the mind that say, I'm different. Even in the process of waking up, there's a spiritual ego that it's really insidious. It's really has to be overcome so you can awaken to the forgotten. But when you start thinking that you're somehow special because of this awakening, then you got a bigger, harder to see, this spiritual ego. After my awakening, it took me a year or more, 2 years, to recognize that I had developed an ego. And this was manifested in wanting to share. I shared with everyone closest to me. And the ones closest to me were all involved with the same teacher, the same group. basically, and studying the same things, so that there was some sense of familiarity, but really nobody had a clue. And then I had to learn, keep your cards close to your vest. People don't believe you anyway. And so what? The day comes when you realize that you don't need validation. Even your teacher doesn't have to validate, because no one can possibly know the unknowable. And part of the unknowable is our state of evolution. Where are we on the cosmic scale? How awakened are we? Where are we in the process? Nobody knows. I don't know. I can feel a kinship. I can feel my heart pulling to certain people, but I can't know in the same knowing, with the same certainty that I know about my awakening. It's only for me. And when you realize that, when you realize, and I want to go back to duality again, because this was the last thing to go before the 2 or 3 day period of that my enlightenment, my awakening. I don't like enlightenment. We're always in the light. But my awakening, remembering the forgotten, basically, took place over 3 days. And first had to deal with questions. And I had already eliminated questions. Okay, so I was a little bit ahead of the game. Questions were gone. Not questions for nobody. Not even for myself. Not even for the universe. No questions. Questions gone. Okay, the second thing that I had to face is fear. Now, the universe has always provided for me, but in a minimum state, compared to everybody else, I was always okay. But there would be some anxiety because I didn't have enough to make me secure. And now I realize that Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, those billionaires, Mark Zuckerberg, they don't feel secure. In fact, they even feel less secure than I did with just enough to get by. But I always was okay. I was always provided for. And sometimes I failed to recognize the significance of that. What a blessing it was to always be okay. And then I didn't get burdened. I didn't have to divest myself of all these riches, because they're actually impediments to awakening. So the universe provides, and it provides for each and every one of us. But this spiritual ego raises its head and says, I should be, I'm awakened, and I'm in this bed, I want the awe and the appreciation. And part of me wanted validation, even at this point. And then it really began. Life begins after awakening. And we'll talk more and more about that, because I'm still in the throes of what this means. There's still another step. It's like an endless stairway to heaven. There's always another step. There's always more to grasp, to experience. Otherwise, how boring would it be? So, the next thing I had to deal with fear, and the first fear I had was lack of. And I saw that I'd never, 99.9%, all the pundits say 99.9% of what we worry about never comes to pass. So, I'd already been destitute. I'd been homeless with pennies in my pocket, literally pennies in my pocket. And it couldn't go down. At least I had a car. I guess I could have lost the car, and then I would have been with a little backpack, and then life would have been a little tougher because it's more comfortable. And I had a membership at a gym, so that I could go there and take a shower and keep clean, because the enemy of homelessness is cleanliness. You're never going to get past homelessness when you're dirty. So the first thing you have to do is keep yourself clean. If you want to re-enter society, if you want to be presentable, you have to not stink. You have to be able to wash. Even if you've got 2 shirts and 2 shorts, need to go work with one pair and put the other pair in the washer and dryer. So I wasn't always all the way down as a down could be, but I was down enough that I started looking for alternatives, and it was these alternatives that were always there, but I had to really go down to be able to say, oh, look at that, that's an opportunity, so this is an opportunity. And we're back to spiritual ego. There's a method to my madness. There always is. We're back to the spiritual ego. So that has to be overcome. And before you get to the, even have to worry about the spiritual, I kind of jumped the gun because it was a logical progression of what I was talking about, the process of awakening. Fears. So part of the fears I was talking about was the lack of, the fear of being destitute, the fear of being hungry, the fear of being homeless. And I got to experience a lot of these things. I never can say I was hungry. I always found a way. I was never completely homeless because I had the protection of sleeping in the car. Maybe not so comfortable. And maybe the constant knocking on the window and the flashlight. You never could rest completely because the cops would chase you off. And they didn't care where you went. Just don't be in their beat. Not in my backyard. And so we eliminate fear. We start to say, okay, I've seen that, I've done that, and I'm still here, I'm still kicking, I'm still fighting. I still have the drive, I still have the desire to go home. I still know there's something more. And finally, the last step is the fear of death. It's the hardest to overcome. But fortunately, I already had enough experience and enough glimpses of it being eternal and that nothing dies. Energy is just expressed in a new form, and it's this constant change. And that you can't destroy energy, that energy just will come up in a new way. And the last obstacle was dualism, because it still said, okay, me and them, I'm enlightened, they're not. This basic bottom line. And I started laughing because my mind became capable of entertaining diametrically opposed phenomenon. I could see that love and hate, that so-called dualism, me, you, separateness, dualism, were the same. Love and hate, light and dark, sun and moon, male and female, it's all one. And this, coupled with the understanding that we live, we're part of the infinite, and that we can't die, we just re-express. Energy has to be re-expressed. This led to the great Buddha laugh, the last step.